Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Loma Stout Natural Processed Colombia from Brandywine Coffee Roasters. And there's the bag right there. And Brandywine, based out of Wilmington, Delaware, and they're a coffee roaster that's featured on this channel a couple of times before, but I'm sure the question a lot of people are more curious about is why on earth we purchased this. Well, first things first, shout out to and thank you to my brother for this, as he purchased this as a birthday gift for me a couple of weeks ago. And it's kind of funny because he doesn't drink coffee and I don't really drink beer. So I kind of nudged him and said, hey, why don't you just buy me this for my birthday? Because this kind of represents both of our interests. So yeah, thanks to him for this. He's probably not even watching this. But in addition to that, I know I've kind of sworn off natural processed Colombians, but technically this is a stout natural processed Colombian. I'm kidding on that, but it's an interesting coffee. It's an interesting sounding coffee, and one of the things I really like doing on this channel is reviewing kind of interesting, processing methods for coffees and interesting coffees in general. If there's one coffee roaster that kind of epitomizes the experimental coffee scene, Brandywine is probably right up top of that list. So I'm looking forward to discussing this coffee. I think it'll be an interesting review. This right here is day 22 of this coffee. And recipe we went with for this coffee was a 16.671 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 205 degrees Fahrenheit. Definitely like this one better through the Chemex, which indicates a more medium grind. Roast profile for Brandywine typically is a light medium American, but when it comes to these interesting processing methods, there are a couple of notes I wanted to say about it. Just like with the Vice and Virtue coffee, the actual brew itself, it comes out a pretty strange color, and the beans in general just appear a little bit more dark, but that is likely because of the processing method. So it's kind of difficult to exactly gauge where on the development spectrum this coffee is. It's going to be a little bit more developed than your light mediums, but not too bad in that sense. Hopefully that gives you a good idea. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. So day 7, first impression, and it was actually not quite as overbearing as initially expected. So these natural processed Colombians, my biggest grievance has been they're just over the top. And this one wasn't that bad. It was very strong in general. Let's not take that for granted, as it was very rich and chocolatey with a bit of the booze-like heaviness. It was void of the winey aspects, which is a huge deal. That's probably been the biggest sticking point to me in terms of these natural processed Colombians, is that winey aspect. So it was much better than expected, honestly. Day 9 went back, brewed with the Chemex, and still not as overbearing as expected. The absence of the cherry abundance also gives it a nice focal point to this cup of coffee. I feel like that also has been kind of a sticking point to me, as those natural processed Colombians have been just kind of three things: dark chocolate, cherry, and wine. And when you're kind of eliminating two of those big aspects, the cherry and the wine, then you're just kind of focusing on the really heavy, robust chocolatiness coming from a cup of coffee. It's got a better focal point in general. So that's why I think I was liking this coffee better than most natural processed Colombians. Day 11 ran it through the automatic coffee maker, and it was a little bit more uneven this way, and it felt slightly less clean. It was skewing a bit more in the direction of the stronger kind of coffee stout. So it's kind of funny. I mean, I do like to try those coffee beers just because I always hope that they're going to be better than I expect, and I never end up actually liking them. But that's just basically the way this coffee was. Chocolate is undeniably strong and robust, and that's not surprising, and it's to be expected. Day 13, back through the Chemex at lower temperatures, and can't help but emphasize how beer-like this entire experience is, and that shouldn't come as a surprise in any sense. Best descriptor for the cup in general, well, beer coffee. Much more pleasant than the Chemex though in general, so I think it kind of hit me at this point that it's basically like drinking a really hot beer, which is kind of a weird thing. So when it is brewed as a cold brew, it's kind of interesting. Yeah, definitely tastes like a coffee beer in that way. Day 15, coffee seems to be intensifying slightly, and it has now a bit of that kind of olive aspect. And that's been probably the biggest issue with the V60 brewing it for me, is it definitely does kind of emphasize that point specifically. I've experienced that quote-unquote olive taste coming from a lot of these natural processed Colombians in general too. So I didn't particularly like that coming from the V60, and mostly remained consistent otherwise with a heavy emphasis on that strong, rich chocolate base. Day 17, I attempted a bypass just because I've heard from so many people that when you bypass these really intense coffees that it makes them a lot more bearable, and it did. It toned down the really strong aspects of this coffee, but I think I actually really enjoyed just the really strong abundance that you were getting from this coffee, since it was absent of the two characteristics I dislike the most from natural processed Colombian coffees. So rich, dark beer-like cup in general, not too bad. Still getting a little bit of that kind of olive taste with experiencing the bypass method. Day 20, back through the Chemex one more time, and it's just so much better through the Chemex because you're basically eliminating a lot of those factors. And I've always said the Chemex can strip away some of the negative aspects. Sometimes it even strips away positive aspects. But in this case, you're just eliminating a lot of my least favorite characteristics from the cup of coffee. There's a dark sweetness. They have a molasses note, flavor note listed on here, and that's likely what that really dark sweetness is. I could definitely see that. And there's an ever so slight grainy cherry, but when we look at the tasting wheel, you'll see that it actually is not that bad by any means. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And you guys might be surprised that there isn't a single level 5 on this tasting wheel, because I'm pretty surprised by that too. So let's run through it real quick. We have 4 level 4s. So the finish and the sweetness, and I kind of mentioned that there's that really dark sweetness, but so many of these coffees have been just overbearing, and this one isn't overbearing in the sweetness or in the finish. The finish is actually a little more even, and it doesn't last as eternal as so many other natural processed Colombians. So I like those both being at a level 4. That's a nice change of pace for me. Body level 4, that's through the Chemex. This is a really heavy bodied cup of coffee. They have a creamy note listed on here, yeah, and brewed through other methods, it was very heavy on the body. So seeing it all the way that high at a level 4 through the Chemex, that just kind of shows you how strong and heavy the body was for this cup of coffee. And the chocolate level 4, I contemplated bumping that up to a level 5. I could even see it at a level 5, but I don't think anything here was too overbearing, too abundant. So I actually think that the level 4 is pretty good for the chocolate as well. And a bunch of the level 3s, we have the bitterness and the acidity. I feel like the acidity is a little high there. It's probably lower side of the level 3, maybe higher side of the level 2. There were times I was experiencing it in significant measure. And the bitterness, I think reading through their descriptor, they said that they did their best to avoid any sort of alcoholic bitterness. I guess it still has that kind of beer bitterness, the chocolate bitterness to it, so that's why I definitely see it at that level 3. And then in some level 2s that I really must discuss, the cleanliness. That is actually remarkable because this is much more clean than so many other natural processed Colombias. So seeing that at level 2 is a huge credit to Brandywine, and I think that they did a pretty good job for this coffee. Getting anything above a level 1 for these sort of coffees is a really good thing for me. And then the smokiness, it's a little smoky. I contemplated that one up to a level 3, but I think the Chemex just really does a good job of dialing this coffee back in so many ways. So I like that there. And then I kind of mentioned that there's an ever so slight grainy cherry, and that's why it's there at that level 2, the berry fruit. But you're also experiencing 0 florals and 0 other fruits from this cup of coffee. So for the most part, I mean, it's missing 2 of my favorite characteristics from coffee in general. And a third, given that it's not the cleanest thing that you're going to experience. All right, my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. A lot better than expected, if I'm being completely honest. So I think I went into this with the mindset that this was going to be one of those coffees that maybe by cup 3 or 4, I was beyond sick of. And I think it got to maybe cup 6 or 7 where I was like, I'm not necessarily enjoying this coffee as much as I did based off of the first impression. But trying it today again through the Chemex, I think if I just would have kept with the Chemex the entire time, it actually would have been a pretty okay drink. And that's kind of the way I'll go with this is, you guys know I'm not the biggest beer person. I just don't drink it in general, and I don't particularly like the taste of it. So having a coffee that is pretty okay with me when given that the major characteristic coming from it is a stout-like beer, I gotta give credit to Brandywine for that. I mean, it's a lot better than expected, like significantly better than expected. I mean, I would never buy another bag of this coffee again, but with that being said, if this is a selling point to me, if I thought it was good enough, then I feel like somebody that genuinely likes this sort of coffee would be a much bigger fan of this. So that does lead into the type of person I would suggest this coffee to. I mean, obviously, if you like your stout beers, I don't know much about beer. I actually know nothing about beer. So if you like your stout beers, then this one's a pretty good fit for you, as I couldn't help but admire how beer-like this coffee was in general. I think they did a really nice job of emphasizing that aspect of this coffee. I think for the most part, though, I'll leave this review at that because, I mean, I know nothing more about beer. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, would love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Loma Stout Natural Processed Colombia from Brandywine Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.